Presidents meet dozens of people every day. If there is a problem, it'll become more and more manifest. I think that sort of became true with Joe Biden. Ultimately, his party really had a falling out with him and led to him withdrawing from the race. So if that becomes a legitimate issue, I think you'll see an upward trajectory. Otherwise, it'll be sort of part of the static in the background.
Jim Kennedy, as always, welcome to the program. Really good to have you on the show. So we've seen the reporting in Politico, the accounts of Robert Fico's meeting with Trump at the Mar-a-Lago a gathering spot, as recounted by EU diplomats from 5 countries and from Brussels. And Fico, on the report, is said to have been shocked and traumatized at President Trump's mental state. And one of those sources said he repeated that's Fico's impression, that Trump seemed out of his mind. Now, Jim, this obviously got an awful lot of attention because, well, the president's mental condition is now increasingly being discussed.
Yeah, although I don't put too much stock in a single anonymously sourced story. What I would look for is a couple things. First of all, do other media, established media, match the story? A real story does get matched. For example, does the Times of London match it? Does the Wall Street Journal match it? That would be important to watch out for. And also look for evidence of stories like this from other parts of the world, not just from Europe. The story itself is quite vague, frankly. It's a little hard to say what was being discussed or
Yes.
what the president's attitude was. So, it bears watching, but I wouldn't put too much stock in this one story, frankly.
No, it's always wise to note that we're looking at one story here and see how it develops. That said, Jim, we're talking about a report by Politico, which is a respected news service, and it quotes diplomats from 5 European countries and a senior official of the European Commission. So to that extent, it looks like a credible piece of work.
Well, listen, anytime a president is older, it bears watching. Certainly that was the case with Joe Biden. It began with a trickle of stories. I remember in early June of 2024, the Wall Street Journal did a big story about it. The White House at the time denounced it. But then a few weeks later came the debate, and then it was evident to the public. Obviously, any president meets with dozens of people every day. So any evidence of problems are going to become manifest pretty quickly. Now, interestingly, Rahm Emanuel, who may run for president, is proposing that there be a 75-year age limit on presidents and other senior officials. It'll be interesting to see if that becomes popular on a bipartisan basis, since both Biden and Trump are older presidents who have been subjected to these kind of questions about their mental acuity.
Yes. Look, discussing anyone's mental state, it's going to be a sensitive matter. But as you say, Joe Biden's cognitive powers were a matter of intense and acute interest and study around the world, and rightly so. So the interest and the very close scrutiny of Donald Trump at this moment, given his appearances recently, the misspeaking, the confusion, we could catalogue them, but it is an absolutely categorically appropriate subject for study and reporting.
Sure. And I think what you will see, if there is a genuine issue here, I think you would see perhaps members of his own party begin to speak up about it. We've seen people in his party willing to take issue with him about some of the enforcement of immigration laws recently. So I think you would see that happen, somewhat similar to with Richard Nixon when his behavior became a question of concern, and ultimately his undoing was when Republicans began to speak up about it. So I would be watchful for that if there is a legitimate issue to be found here.
Yeah, is it worth saying that Robert Fico's subsequent denial was so ferocious? He called the report lies, he called it malicious, he called it politically motivated propaganda. That sounded maybe more intended to avoid falling out with President Trump than really expecting to be very much more widely believed.
Yeah, it was a bit over the top. I'm not too trustful of anonymous sources. I'm also not too trustful of people that go over the top in their denial of a anonymous source story. So that bears watching. But it's worth noting he's not an enemy of the president. He's been supportive of the president on some key issues. So that I think put more stock into it. But nonetheless, I think we all should be mindful. There are certainly plenty of other legitimate policy issues with which to disagree with the administration, whether it's, tariffs or immigration policy, et cetera. But of course, anytime a president gets reaching 80 or beyond, that's certainly an issue that comes up.
So it is, I guess, it's reasonable to say that this story, as we say in the news business, it's a story that's got legs.
It does, but again, the presidents meet dozens of people every day. If there is a problem, it'll become more and more manifest. I think that sort of became true with Joe Biden. Ultimately, his party really had a falling out with him and led to him withdrawing from the race. So if that becomes a legitimate issue, I think you'll see an upward trajectory. Otherwise, it'll be sort of part of the static in the background.
Okay, just lastly, and very much more broadly, we discuss the components of this analysis constantly every day. But overall, Jim, do you consider your country, the United States, is now a country in a democratic crisis?
I don't know if I would call it a democratic crisis. We do have a crisis of faith, a crisis of confidence, particularly in institutions. It somewhat reminds me of the 60s. Things we forget how tumultuous things were back then. So it does remind me a little bit of that turmoil, the civic disorder, et cetera. So there is a problem. I think it's made magnified by social media and its impact on technology on the world. I think it's broader than politics. I think it's a societal issue affecting the trajectory of the human species.
Jim Kennedy, great to talk to you as always.